Good day, people of the internet. I'd like to welcome you to the second episode of Matt and Matt at the Movies. I'm Matt Parkinson, and my co-host today, since he was decent enough last week, is Matt Jarrell.
Howdy, internet. How's it going?
Discussed on the show today, this week's wide releases and expansions with Inherent Vice, Selma, and Taken 3. In honor of Taken 3, our topic of the week is our favorite and least favorite movie trilogies. Jarrell and I will give you 3 of each that you either need to see or should avoid. First off, this week's nationwide expansions, which brings us to 2 potential Oscar movies with Inherent Vice and Selma. We'll begin with Inherent Vice. Directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, working from a novel written by Thomas Pynchon, the film takes us back to 1970s Los Angeles and follows Doc Sportello, a private investigator played by Joaquin Phoenix. An ex-girlfriend, played by Catherine Waterston, shows up one night and sets the plot in motion. People go missing, twists occur, and more pot is smoked than a typical 420 celebration. Gerald, what'd you think?
This movie is weird, to say the least. I mean, that makes sense given the amount of drugs that are certainly consumed, but it feels like this really, really sprawling, gritty, sort of investigatory epic that ends up just spiraling out of control in some areas. I'm concerned about it because there's too many characters. The plot fits together more conveniently than a put-together puzzle. And the one positive for it for me definitely is the amount of humor that's in it. It makes the weirdness less jarring to me. So, a pretty decent movie all around, although I still have some mixed feelings about it. What did you think?
I found it incoherent and incomprehensible. I think it was intentionally so. I think that Paul Thomas Anderson was trying to put us in the perspective of someone who's completely high on dope for the entire time. And he succeeded. And I figure it was the first time I'd ever watched a movie and thought, man, if I was on drugs, would I either understand this or stop caring about understanding it?
I actually had kind of some similar thought in that basically I kept flashing back to The Big Lebowski, where I'm wondering, if I was high, would I enjoy this movie more? And I've never been high, so I don't know how that works. But yeah, I basically had that same feeling. It's trippy beyond belief.
And I think that's why it was so long too, because things slow down when you're high. So I've been told, at least for pot. I mean, you hear people who are stoned in movies at least, and they're, talking slow or having trouble understanding things right away, and I think that's part of the pacing of this movie is because of that.
Well, so what I wonder is, with Josh Brolin consuming as much pot as he did in that one scene, I'm wondering, okay, did he, go from being this high-energy lunatic to being just a evened-out person, or did he just die, basically, after he walked out of the house?
I figure he was trying to figure out the myth of whether or not you can overdose on pot. He's gonna be testing that one.
I guess, because, that was just insane.
That was...
The look that Joaquin Phoenix gives him when he does it, it's like, dude, you're gonna be so dead.
See, I think Joaquin Phoenix was great in this movie, and I think his reactions to a lot of the things that go on make a lot of the humor so much more. I mean, that scene with Josh Brolin was probably the biggest laugh-out-loud scene in the film. Maybe outside of the that one scene at a place of questionable origin.
Yeah.
But it was his reaction that made that shot. Or that
it really did. I mean, his reactions made a lot of the different things. I mean, I think there's a scene that's in the trailer, but where he looks at a picture of this little girl and she's clearly been messed up because her mother was on drugs at the time.
And we never see her, or we never see the picture.
Yeah, you never see the picture, but he just yells audibly for one brief second, and it's just. When I saw it in the trailer, I didn't find it funny, but then when I see it in context of the movie, that was actually funny.
It was great.
Exactly. So his character, obviously he's the lead, so he's supposed to hold it together, but that madness of his character elevates the movie quite a bit. And it's funny, I was at first, when I first was seeing that character, I didn't quite like it as much, and especially from Joaquin Phoenix's performance, but definitely as the movie progressed, I started really liking this character just for how utterly goofy he is. And then when you put him opposite Josh Brolin playing the straight man, well, mostly the straight man, because there are moments where
I don't know that phallic object over
yeah, it's like bananas. I'm like, oh dear. Like, what are they trying to tell us?
there were actually there was an extended scene in, I think it was a car when it's just Josh Brolin eating, it was a frozen banana covered in chocolate, I think.
Yes.
Which is maybe important, maybe not. And it's just got Joaquin Phoenix just sitting there reacting to that.
Yes.
There were 4 people in my theater that left, never came back, and that was pretty early on. There were a bunch of walkouts for Inherent Vice.
We had a couple of walkouts in my screening, but not as bad as I guess I could have expected. But yeah, and especially because obviously the car is moving, but it's just the camera is static, so it's just you're seeing Joaquin Phoenix, Josh Brolin, and it's hilarious to watch.
No cuts, no nothing. It was just
exactly.
them.
Yes.
And, I mean, there were lots of long takes in the film. It was good. It was technically well made. I mean,
yes,
it's Paul Thomas Anderson. He knows what he's doing.
Indeed, he does.
And I feel like, well, maybe if it was lesser people, the movie would have just fallen flat. I mean, if it was a worse lead, if it was a worse director, if the supporting cast wasn't as good, it all would have fallen flat. But it came together and at least kind of worked.
Yeah, well, and see, that's the funny thing is that you say if there's been other people, I honestly would have expected this to be something like what a Seth Rogen would do. I mean, because obviously stoner comedies are kind of his bread and butter. But then, okay, you get somebody as renowned as Paul Thomas Anderson, and then bringing in Joaquin Phoenix and Josh Brolin and Reese Witherspoon and Catherine Waterston,
Benicio del Toro.
Exactly, and yet he makes this goofy and yet still hilariously compelling, sprawling thing. I mean, a drug trip is probably the best way of putting it, and it mostly works. And it's certainly got its flaws, but it works.
It's successful enough that it doesn't feel like a waste of time watching it.
No, by no means does it feel like a waste of time.
I mean, it could have been edited down to probably 90 minutes, because that's about how much plot there is.
Yeah, you would have had to cut out a lot of stuff, both plot-wise and character-wise, to achieve it down to a 90-minute.
Yeah, but you could have. I mean, some characters didn't even really serve a purpose. I mean, there's a character played by Martin Short his scenes are hilarious, but he's not really required. No,
not really. I mean, the excess characters also speaks to the excess of plot, because everything just fits conveniently. I mean, at the beginning when he first gets the visit from Catherine Waterston's character as his ex-girlfriend, and she tells him, okay, I've got this land baron who's kind of interested in me, and yet his wife and her boyfriend are talking about putting him in an insane asylum in order to take his money, and I might get cut in on it. I mean, and then you go to the next thing, and it gives you another puzzle piece, and then the next scene gives you another puzzle piece, and it's like, okay, this feels way too convenient, and it fits more like it serves for the narrative and not actually for something coherent.
And it feels like that at the end, but while it's playing, I was just like, what is going on? I mean, once everything fits into place, you're like, okay, this is a bit convenient, but while it's going on, I'm like, I'm confused by this, man.
Yeah, I thought I was noticing the convenience of it just right from the beginning. I mean, he gets Catherine Waterston's character to give him that motivation, and then Jade Chung's character at the place of questionable origin gives him another one, and then Michael K. Williams shows up as the former gangbanger, and we should also mention, I mean, the guy's name is Doc Sportello. He's a private eye, but he's called Doc because he literally works out of a doctor's office.
Because that's where the good drugs are kept.
Exactly, it is. And I found that to be utterly hilarious to see. It's like, wait a minute, he's a PI and he's at a doctor. Oh.
He's working at the end office of a doctor's office, or walk-in clinic. I don't even think it was a real doctor's office.
No, it was definitely like, I mean, it's a 2 or 3 room clinic, and I mean, there's a scene where he's sitting there talking to somebody, and he's doing nitrous at the same time. I mean,
and also pot.
Yes, it's like he's smoking pot and inhaling laughing gas at the same time.
And then the client the client he has is also joining in. It's hilarious.
Yes, and we should also talk about Owen Wilson in this because.
Do we have to?
Well, we kind of do. I mean, he's like the one big name we really haven't brought into this, but
it's true.
He's, I think, the one that really didn't entirely make sense for me because he just kind of comes in and out as he pleases, which, I mean, again, this is a drug movie, so I guess that kind of fits, but still, it's like...
He's playing an undercover guy who's undercover for basically everyone at this point.
Which makes no sense.
Yeah, I didn't really...
Well, like, I mean, he shows up at the one club, and it's like, Owen Wilson? What are you doing here? And then he disappears, and then he shows up again at the party randomly, and then I was like, what? I think the really random one was when he shows up at the insane asylum. Like,
yeah.
Okay, why do you keep randomly appearing? What's going on?
It was basically every place that we hadn't already visited, he would somehow be there.
Pretty much.
And it was why? Yeah, especially because it's Owen Wilson, and we're like, why?
Yeah. Well,
not the biggest fan of Owen Wilson.
I'm not so much either. He's got a few roles that I really like, although I'll still take this role over like Night at the Museum or something like that.
But it's not really required even.
No, not really. I mean
he works as an informant for Doc a couple of times, but
yeah, well, and that's so funny. Like you read the trailers and you think that it's basically just going to be about this corrupt land deal sort of thing that's going on.
And it is not at all.
Not really. I mean, the land baron character. I mean, he's literally in one scene himself, and then you see him in newspaper clippings a couple different times. And I mean, it's Eric Roberts, which makes it even more weird. I mean, when I saw the credits and it said Eric Roberts, like, what are you doing here, Eric Roberts? Why are you not off making some D-list action movie that nobody will ever see?
Hey, he was in The Dark Knight.
Okay, yes.
That's like his biggest acting thing to date, but he's in like hundreds of movies. It's weird.
I know. Well, that's what I'm saying.
He's got the weirdest career.
Well, he's usually in these D-list action movies that nobody ever sees. So,
and
I'm like,
DOA.
Yeah.
If we remember that, we do.
Why?
I can give you a few reasons.
Well, let's not.
Transitioning very smoothly from DOA, Selma. Gerald, you're the American here, and the film is, a little bit more culturally relevant to you. I'll let you introduce it.
Okay, so Selma is directed by Ava DuVernay and based on a script by Paul Webb, who, I didn't know this until recently, this is Paul Webb's first credited screenwriting job, so getting a big Oscar movie like this, and it's her first job, that's pretty impressive. But it tells the story of how Dr. Martin Luther King, who's played by David Oyelowo in this film, sets his sights on Selma, Alabama as a center of new protests against racial inequality in the American South, and he particularly focuses on voting rights in this particular instance, but he faces a lot of wavering support from President Lyndon Johnson, who's played by Tom Wilkinson, and he faces even worse, outright hostility from Alabama Governor George Wallace, who's played by Tim Roth in this film. And it's a tale of tragedy and triumph that's not your usual look at Martin Luther King. And so that raises a question for you, my Canadian cohort. As someone who maybe didn't grow up hearing as much about Dr. King, what did you think?
Well, see, Martin Luther King is going to be idealized and idolized and made a hero, and he's going to stay that way. And you get that here. Not in the movie, but in Canada, we get what the media presents him as, and our textbooks are like, he was this great, peaceful man who was the greatest person ever, basically. And in the movie, he's stripped of that a little bit. Now, Selma's not a Martin Luther King biopic, because it's not really about him. He's just one of the people orchestrating these events. And it was nice to see him just portrayed as a man. I feel like he could have been given a bit more depth and a bit more character, but I feel it was also a little bit of the point to not do that, because the movie doesn't want to hold him up on this impenetrable pedestal. It wants to have him as one of the players in this event.
And I completely agree that it's a lot better that they chose not to make this either a documentary that's basically just a recitation of facts, or even worse, in my opinion, a treacly walk through the civil rights movement where we just get, okay, here's a big scene, and here's a big scene, and here's a big scene, and that's it. In this case, they strip him of all this grandiosity that we hold him up as. I mean, you don't see the "I have a dream" speech in this film at all, and that is the moment that most people think of when they think of him. I mean, and you're also correct, it's not a biopic. I mean, you could have just made this where it's him growing up and enduring the struggles that he goes through, and
he begins this film winning the Nobel Peace Prize. He's already at that point.
Yes, exactly. And it makes it so that you're not just getting this bland version of history that we always read. I mean, I think this is a masterclass because it makes him a human, but it also makes him a propaganda master. It's not just, oh, we have this rightful cause as we do.
He was very good at manipulation.
Yes, and it made it. I mean, there's scenes where he's meeting with his allies, and they're talking about, well, okay, this particular sheriff down here, is he the sort of man who's going to be calm and, I mean, still evil but not crazy, or is he like Bull Connor? Is he going to fly off the handle and give us ammunition to say, hey, here's a problem? And I think that makes it so much better of a film. It signifies how good the acting is in this film. I mean,
the acting is really great.
David Oyelowo embodies Dr. King amazingly, in my opinion. I mean, body language-wise, even his speaking style, to a point, it's not quite perfect, but it's, especially when he's at the church, and then there's a couple scenes where he's giving speeches at a church, whether it's at a sermon or at a funeral, and you just get sucked into just listening to him talk, and it is amazing to listen to.
He perfectly captures the charisma.
Yes.
That I felt like King had.
Yes. And then at the same time, you get quieter scenes where they make him into a man, where he's having marital problems with his wife over, is this something that we can continue? Because, I mean, I'm like Carmen Ejogo plays Coretta Scott King, and she repeatedly says, I am afraid for our lives, and more importantly for our children's lives, because of what we're doing. What we're doing is right, but I'm still very afraid. And that also leads to Dr. King having a lot of doubts and fears. I mean, there's a scene where he's in a jail cell and he's talking with one of his friends, and they say, I mean, are we doing the right thing? Will this actually achieve what we want it to? And then there's another scene later where he's really experiencing doubts, and he's in the car with Stephen James playing John Lewis, and John Lewis, I mean, having been a less than supportive person of Dr. King prior to that, he's now the one who's playing cheerleader for Dr. King and saying, look, this is important. You got to do this. Yes, you convinced us of this. I mean, we disagreed on this, but now we have to do this, and yes, it's going to be hard, but you have to lead us. You are the one who has to lead us. And I love those humanizing moments just as much as the brilliant speeches that he gives throughout the film.
Meanwhile, Tom Wilkinson and Tim Roth played more. I feel like they were not as complicated in the film as they were in real life.
So George Wallace, I think, with Tim Roth, I think that one works a lot better because, I mean, George
Wallace a villain.
He was a villain. I mean, This is the same man who said segregation now, segregation tomorrow. I mean, and you get that particularly in the scene where he's talking to Johnson, and he says, I don't care what history will say about me, and neither should you. But then Johnson you get, and he actually, I don't think he is as uncomplicated as you think. I think you look at him, and he clearly wants to do the right thing, but then he also faces a lot of uncertainty for how this all will be played out. And it makes him more human. It doesn't turn him into this saint who's going to stand behind Dr. King 100% and do the right thing, but he's also not going to stand by and let all these terrible things go on. So I think that makes him a more realistic figure. He's not perfect, but he's not completely evil either. So
He's a little slimy, though.
Well, I wouldn't call him slimy. I would call him I mean, I think human is the right word, because, like I said, he wants to do the right thing, but then at the same time, he's also afraid of political pressure, so he's not sure what to do. Now, George Wallace, on the other hand, I will call him slimy, absolutely, and that's why, like, watching Tim Roth do that performance was just, like, it was cringeworthy, and yet...
It was great.
Yeah, it was...
There are few actors better at playing that type of role than Tim Roth.
I would very much agree. It was so fun to watch him play this just deliciously evil is a good phrase, I think, because he's compelling in the sense of how terrible he is, and yet he is a monster. So you can't help but get absorbed into that.
One of the few times that didn't absorb me in the movie was when Martin Sheen showed up.
Yeah,
he shows up and you're like, oh, it's Martin Sheen, and you're immediately taken out of the movie.
I was taken out a little bit because that scene kind of comes out of nowhere, because it's like suddenly we're in the chambers of a judge, and you got Martin Sheen as the judge, and you got Cuba Gooding Jr. as the lawyer representing King's group, and like, okay, where did this scene come from? And I didn't know Cuba Gooding Jr. and Martin Sheen were in this movie. And then you get obviously later the actual trial scene. And okay, he shows up. I was more prepared for it then, but yeah, that first time where Martin Sheen and Cuba Gooding Jr. show up, I'm like, where did this come from? And so it didn't pull me out of the movie terribly, but it was definitely a contrast, because it's one of the few scenes where you don't have either David Oyelowo or Tom Wilkinson on screen, or even Carmen Ejogo's Coretta Scott King.
Or even Oprah, who's great in this.
Yeah, people will find Oprah being in this movie rather amusing. But I also think, I mean, she in some ways serves as a good framing device with starting off basically the Selma protest as a whole. And then I still love that she gets in the one scene where she hits the corrupt police commissioner or whatever in whatever. And I mean, that's one of the moments that woman is actually really known for in real life. She actually passed away within the last couple of years, I believe. So, yeah, that was a very funny thing to see Oprah get to do. And she doesn't, like, it's not one of those things where it feels like stunt casting and she sticks out like a sore thumb. She actually really works in this movie, I think.
Yeah, very much unlike Martin Sheen, I felt. Like, you don't go, oh, hey, it's Oprah, but you do go, oh, hey, it's Martin Sheen. Yeah,
well, I would certainly agree with that. And then I think the other thing that I think pushes this over the top for me is the actual depiction of what it's called the Bloody Sunday March, which is the march on the bridge where all utter chaos breaks loose, and you see the police brutality. And I mean, the "I Have a Dream" speech is certainly an iconic moment in the history of the civil rights movement, but the Bloody Sunday March is another one because of the fact that it was depicted on television live, and people around the country and around the world got to see the madness of what was going on down in Alabama at the time. And it's filmed beautifully by Bradford Young, and the characters acted so. And if I recall correctly, Dr. King wasn't even in that scene. That's the thing. Martin Luther King wasn't even in that particular scene, and yet it still was a massive gut punch that you can't watch that and not think, wow, I still cannot believe that this actually happened. So
a lot of the film is like that. It was surprisingly violent. I'm actually surprised they got a PG-13 with how violent it turned out to be.
Yeah, I mean, PG-13 can get you can get some violent content without being terribly explicit, I think, in that. I mean, obviously the two most violent scenes are the bridge beating and then the murder of one of the young men who's involved in the protests. And so, interestingly, that was, I think, or the funeral scene for him is the scene where I really found myself realizing this movie is great.
Yeah.
And that so rarely happens where I'm watching a movie and I think I'm watching something brilliant on screen. And then watching the speech that Dr. King gives at that funeral is just something beautiful to behold, in my opinion.
I think that was kind of, not really a turning point, but the point when you get on board and you go, I'm completely okay with this.
Yes, I would absolutely agree.
Something we're not okay with is the PG-13 as well rated Taken 3. And Taken 3 was the only new release this week. It opened somewhere around 3,500 cinemas in America. And, I mean, once again, we got Liam Neeson, who at one point said that he wasn't going to do it at Taken 3, but $20 million can go a long way. He plays retired government operative Brian Mills. His ex-wife, Famke Janssen, is killed. He's framed for murder, and he's the one who has to figure out how to, who is behind it. Forrest Whitaker's Inspector Dotzler, whatever, and is pursuing him, and he also has to try to sneak in communications with his daughter Kim, played by Maggie Grace, in order to make sure that she's okay. It's been directed by Olivier Megaton, whose name is great. Megaton was also behind the second film. Taken 3 is promised to be the final film, but let's hope that's what it is.
Yeah, this movie is so bad that I want this franchise and realistically the entire older actor in an action movie genre to die quickly because I hate this movie so much. I mean, the action sequences are bland and bad. I didn't even really like the acting. I'm sorry, I don't buy Liam Neeson as this action dude who can just do anything anymore.
But he growls a lot.
Okay, I don't care. That's not intimidating anymore.
I know.
The reason why the first Taken works a little bit is because it was this novel idea of, hey, we got Oscar Schindler in playing an action movie. Wow, isn't that cool? And I'm sorry, now it's old. I don't care. Liam Neeson looks and acts old. I think it's finally catching up to him. To me, Forrest Whitaker looked bored playing this role. I mean, maybe he was. He looked bored to me, and especially when they give him not one but two affectations, where he's got the rubber band and he's wrapping it around his hand as some sort of.
He's
thing.
also got the chest piece.
Yes, he's got the chest piece. It's like, oh, this is supposed to be symbolic and so make him look cool. Whenever I'm like, no, it doesn't. It just makes him. Yeah, it makes him look goofy. And Famke Janssen, she's barely in the movie, so. Yay, Famke Janssen. And then Maggie Grace, I'm sorry, to me she's basically there to either be a tear factory or to deliver these pronouncements of her dad's innocence and be defiant towards the police and what have you. And I'm like, why? And then we could get into the husband, because I'm sorry, that dude is campy and dumb, and then of course with the Russians, oh my goodness, you want to talk about stereotyping?
The Russians who are barely even in the movie.
Yes, they show up in the cold open, and then I actually looked at my watch to see they don't show up again until an hour and 5 minutes into the film. And I'm like, okay, what was the point of this?
Well, we had to go around doing lots of chase scenes.
Chase scenes that weren't even that good. I mean,
they were terrible.
The shaky cam cinematography and the clip editing was so bad that, I mean, it kept I think, half a second was an edit during some of these chase sequences early on.
Some of them were that bad, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, the only reason why Liam Neeson even looks like he's running at all is because the camera is shaking and the editing is so clipped that...
And they shot him from behind and it was stunt doubles.
Yeah. I mean, if he doesn't have at least one stunt double working in this movie, I'm very surprised. I mean, there's a scene in the beginning where he's climbing over fences to try to escape the cops, and...
You never see his face for like 3 minutes.
Yeah. So much wrong with this movie. And, I mean, Luc Besson as a writer, I mean, he co-wrote the script on this one, he's producer. I know the man can do good work because he's done good work before, but these Taken movies just don't make sense. I mean, especially this one because, okay, one, nobody gets taken in this movie, and then like the first one, okay, worked a little bit. The second one was terrible, and then this one
is worse somehow.
Yeah, somehow. I didn't think that was possible because the second one was so bad. But I want him to either take a break from writing or just, I don't know, maybe
try something different.
Yeah, try not to make 3 scripts in the same year, something like that. Because I think last year he had at least 2 movies. Because I believe he had Brick Mansions, and then he was also, I think, wrote Lucy as well.
He also had 3 Days to Kill, I believe.
Was he attached to that too?
I think that was Besson, yeah.
2 bad movies and 1 okay movie. Yeah, and then he comes up with this, and I'm like, Mr. Besson, I love some of your work, but please just stop for a little bit because it's bothering me. And then even more bothering me, at least for me personally, is the PG-13 rating.
It doesn't help.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I'm sorry, when the most amount of blood that's in this movie is a couple of drops of cranberry juice in a scene where a woman has supposedly had her throat slit, which you can't even tell that her throat was slit until like 20 minutes later.
Yeah, we see what, like, Famke Janssen, her character is killed, and we see the knife with a little bit of blood on it. She's just lying in a bed. No blood on the bed, really. It takes us until we try to identify her body at the morgue until we see the slice in her throat.
Yeah, and along the same lines, there are instances where people get shot and you can't even tell where they've been shot. I mean, just even that cold open with the guy in the bank vault, and I'm like, where did he get shot?
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah,
until he grabbed the part where he got shot.
Yeah, and it was like, how bad can this thing be? And then the worst crime with the PG-13 is a scene, it's a fight in a grocery store, and he's whittled down it to one guy, and the guy literally puts a gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger, and he just falls over backwards, and that's it. There's no blood, there's no spatter of any sort.
And we don't even see him pull the trigger. We have to watch, pan over to Liam Neeson's face, who's completely blank.
Yeah, and I mean, it really looks like he just bored himself to death.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this movie drove me crazy.
I think my problem with this series, even more so than that, is that there's no sense of escalation.
Well, I mean, how do you escalate on this?
Exactly. The first movie, it had the best action. It had kind of evil guys. The second movie, okay, it's a kind of evil guy. And then the third movie, okay, it's kind of evil guys. Like, it's just the villains are all either the same or even worse.
Yeah,
and the action's gotten less and less and worse.
I think the only there's no way that you can really give this escalation, I don't think, because as you say, I mean, we had some kind of nasty guys. The second one, at least on its surface, seemed like it could be interesting. It's like, oh, what if the family members of all the guys he killed in the first one decided to get revenge on him? And then this one is just, oh, we have this corrupt Russian guy, and then, oh, there's this, okay, he's looking for this businessman who owes him a lot of money, which, I'm sorry, I could see that plot twist coming from a mile away. I mean, like...
Yeah. There's one plot twist too many in this.
Just a bit.
I mean, it could have ended at 90 minutes, and then it goes on because of another plot twist, so we get one more stupid chase scene. I mean, the plane thing was okay.
Okay. The plane thing was stupid beyond belief. And like, he says literally to the police officer, Forrest Whitaker, my priority is to protect my daughter. And so what does he do? He crashes the plane she's in by running a car into the plane.
Yeah, but it was cool to see. I like to see it. I haven't seen someone take out the wheel of a plane with a car before.
I guess, but I'm sorry, that comes at the very end of the movie. By that time, I
was done.
Yeah, I was done like long before that, but yeah, I'm sorry, that scene just cannot elevate it or save it at all, because it's just so. And then again, you want to talk about, oh, where did he get shot? I mean, okay, if it weren't for the fact that he grabs his chest where he got shot, I wouldn't have been able to tell.
I mean, it's not like it slowed him down any. He was already moving at a glacial pace.
Yeah. And I'm like, if your idea of getting the bad guy is, oh, let's have him have the daughter hit him, and then that separates them, and so Neeson can take him out. Yay.
It was...
And then one other thing that I have to really harp on is how on earth does he survive 2 car crashes? I mean, one, he gets pushed off of a cliff while he's in a car, and speaking of that scene, were these filmmakers taking notes from Michael Bay or something? Because there seems to be a lot of these gigantic napalm-like explosions everywhere that are just like, I'm sorry, there's no way that would happen. And then that's most indicative of when he crashes a car into an elevator shaft, it falls down the elevator shaft, blows up, and yet somehow Liam Neeson has a couple of scratches on him, and that's it.
Yeah, he's fine.
Yeah, I'm sorry, what? I mean, they literally have a gigantic explosion go up this elevator shaft, and yet Liam Neeson's fine. I'm like,
you get to see it from the outside. It, like, blows up.
An entire office building.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
And then Liam Neeson's just like, yeah, what's up?
I mean,
it's all good.
Even Michael Bay would say, okay, dude, you need to calm down. This is getting ridiculous. So, Taken 3, I hate this movie. I mean, I didn't have high expectations going in, but I wrote in my review, this movie is best summed up by a scene where Liam Neeson is in a sewer. It's covered in filth. Please, I know we're going to get a Taken 4 because of how well this is doing at the box office, but please, can we not do this again?
The reason we talked about Taken 3 last was so that we could transition naturally, here's a bit of behind-the-scenes stuff for you, into our discussion topic of the week, which is our favorite and least favorite trilogies of all time. I'd like to note at this point that favorite is not synonymous with best, and least favorite is not synonymous with worst. It's possible, in fact it's probable, that our list would be at least slightly different if this were the case. I don't know about Gerald, but the Godfather trilogy isn't on my list for this very reason, and also, because the third one kind of isn't that good. With that said, Gerald, what was your number 3 on your favorite list?
Okay, so firstly, I'm very much in agreement with you on The Godfather. It is not on my list, and pretty much for the exact same reasons. But anyway, my number 3 favorite trilogy is the original Star Wars prequel trilogy with A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Now, I do have problems with Return of the Jedi being nowhere near as good as Star Wars or Empire, but that trilogy is so influential and just so well done overall that it's just a sheer amazement for me. I mean, Star Wars and Jaws basically invented the summer blockbuster that we now enjoy, and I loved the world that George Lucas and his team crafted. I love all these characters. I mean, there's a reason why Darth Vader is considered like one of the most iconic villains ever. I love the lines there's so many quotable lines from that movie that we still use just in general pop culture today. And it has had some interesting history in recent decades with Mr. Lucas doing things to them that I am very much unhappy with him about, which...
It's tough to agree with a lot of the decisions he's made in recent years.
Yeah, but I'm not going to try to spend an entire thing soapboxing on that. If you want to really see the case laid out, go watch The People versus George Lucas. It's a fantastic documentary that lays out all these different arguments much better than I ever could. But... yeah, the original Star Wars prequel trilogy, or not prequel trilogy, oh my gosh, original trilogy. Wow, that was so bad. But yeah, the original trilogy for me, I still love it. I remember watching it as a kid just over and over and over because I loved everything about it. So that's number 3 on my favorites list.
I can't disagree with liking it. It didn't make my list because probably because I didn't grow up with Star Wars. That's something you kind of have to watch young in order to truly love. I
would actually very much agree with that, and I think, it certainly influenced me as a kid, and and this is also why this is about favorites and not necessarily best, because if I was actually picking a best list, no, I don't think this trilogy would make it on my list either, but that's why we do favorites. So what was number 3 on your favorites list?
The original Girl with the Dragon Tattoo trilogy, also known as the Millennium trilogy.
Yes.
the Swedish movies. I think actually two of them were like direct to TV or something in Sweden. But we got them here edited down to movies, and I really want David Fincher to finish that trilogy because I want to see it again in English. But the Swedish versions we got were really good.
Yes.
Like, they're well acted. The plots are all interesting. They get better as they go on. I mean, I'm maybe in the minority here, but I like the third one the best. And the characters are they're so deep and so rich, and the universe that's created there is so intriguing.
This is an interesting one for me because I first actually got introduced to the Swedish versions thanks to Fincher's American remake, which we can argue about that. I do want him to finish the trilogy, if for no other reason than I want him to complete it. So the interesting thing for me with the Swedish trilogy was this was actually my introduction to Noomi Rapace as an actress. And now she's gone on to get various starring roles. I mean, Prometheus, and she was also
in The Drop last year.
Yeah, she was in The Drop and in the second Sherlock Holmes movie, which the less said about that, the better.
Dead Man Down.
We won't go there. The Stieg Larsson novels are certainly interesting in what they do. I mean, the creation of a character like Lisbeth Salander is so fascinating to me because so often, I mean, it portrays women as victims, and that's one of the big themes is how women are often victimized. But then, I mean, call it, ridiculous, essentially Terminator woman, but when Lisbeth Salander goes off on these guys, it is a joy to watch.
It's so much fun.
Yes, I mean, whether you're watching Noomi Rapace in the Swedish version or even with Rooney Mara in the remake, I mean, I'm sorry, the scene where she gets revenge on that government official is just...
It's great.
It makes you cringe for exactly the right reasons with what she does. So, the Millennium Trilogy is definitely a good choice, I think.
What was second on your list?
Number 2 for me is the Three Flavors Cornetto Trilogy, or the Blood and Ice Cream Trilogy, as some people call it. Now, again...
Another one that's there because it's favorite, not best.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't... Although, this one actually could potentially make one of this for being best, because I love all three of these movies, and no, it's not just because it's Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg. These three movies are just legitimately good. I mean, you get your first movie with Shaun of the Dead setting in a zombie apocalypse where, you have an everyday working stiff who's just kind of stuck in a rut in his life, but then zombies show up, and so that gives him a framing device to try and get his relationship with his parents fixed, try to work things out with his girlfriend, and then also having very interesting chemistry with Nick Frost as his best friend. And there's only, I think, one scene in that movie that I really don't like, which is where they try to decapitate zombies' heads by throwing vinyl records at them. I'm like, what?
And it's funny even saying it, though.
It's funny when you say it, but then when you watch it, I'm like, what are you doing? But so I really enjoy Shaun of the Dead, and then you move on to, this is my favorite of the three, Hot Fuzz, where you get Simon Pegg playing a workaholic cop he's like the best cop ever, and because he's so good, his bosses decide to transfer him to this small, quaint country village, but there's an axe murderer around, and he's committing all these horrible murders, and things are more complicated than they appear, especially when you find out ultimately what the town council is about and all that. And I think what makes this my favorite of these, and why I love this trilogy in general, is it's a movie that sets up its universe so well and so fast. Because usually these films take 30 minutes or so in the first act to set up your universe, and then the plot really kicks in right there. The plot kicks into this movie within 15 minutes, and I love how well it's edited. The climax where they weapon up, and it's that iconic image. He's got shotguns on his back, and he's got grenades and everything. And I love watching that action sequence. It reminded me of when I first saw the lobby shootout in The Matrix way back in 1999. I love that one. And then the weakest one of the trilogy, but still pretty good in my opinion, The World's End, where it completely flips things, because before we've had Simon Pegg playing a serious character, and now we get him playing this complete buffoon. He wants to go and relive his his childhood dream of completing this giant pub crawl in one night, and you get Nick Frost, who up until this movie had been playing goofy, lovable losers, and now he's playing the straight man to Simon Pegg, and he really pulls that off. And then, unfortunately, you get aliens have invaded and have been taking over people's bodies, and so it harkens back to like John Carpenter's The Thing with a lot of its imagery, and the action sequences in this movie particularly are really good as well. I mean, Nick Frost pulls out a backbreaker, which is absolutely hilarious to watch, and seeing Nick Frost be able to do all that is really fun to watch. I love all the referential humor. I mean, there's a thing in Shaun of the Dead where he's talking. Nick Frost is talking to Simon Pegg's mom, and he says, "Well, we're coming to get you, Barbara." It's like that's a reference to George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, and I love that Edgar Wright was clever and meta in that way. It's hilarious to watch all of it. So I love the Cornetto trilogy. It's number 2 on my favorites list. So what is number 2 on your list?
Another 3. It's the Three Colors trilogy by Krzysztof Kieslowski. I hope I pronounced that right. Early 90s movies. Each one, there's blue, red, and white. Not in that order. It's, I think, blue, white, red. Each color supposedly representing a different part of the French flag. And each one has its own theme. One's like an anti-love movie, an anti-whatever movie. And they're so gorgeous. I saw Red first, which it's the final one of the trilogy, which is probably, not a good thing to have seen first, but they're kind of connected. Red kind of concludes all of the stories. But they're all so beautiful. They're all so heartfelt, and they all have a purpose. And I don't think you've seen them.
Not yet.
You're gonna have to.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about the Three Colors trilogy, and that's where the name Three Flavors comes from. Is that on a press tour with Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, they were actually asked, are these movies related to the Three Colors trilogy? Because each of the films features a different flavor of Cornetto ice cream, red, blue, and green in this particular case. So, yeah, I definitely have to go back and check those out. And I mean, they're on my list to watch, so I'm definitely gonna check those out. Especially if you're putting them on your favorite trilogies list, that's definitely a recommendation.
Well, Red even is one of my favorite films of all time.
Even better then.
Yeah. What was your number 1 favorite trilogy?
My favorite trilogy is Toy Story. Now, this is probably going to be controversial and somewhat biased, but I'm honestly of the opinion that Toy Story is the best trilogy of films ever made. Now, the reason I say that is because they're well animated, their characters are wonderful, the voice acting is great, but what really pushes it over the top is story and themes. Because on its surface, it's just a story about toys and their general existence inside the home of this young boy. But then underneath that, you get stories about mortality, about that nothing is permanent, or even that sometimes that we all die, and that there may not be anything for us with that. So I love that, again, we talked about last week, it's Pixar. They don't patronize with these movies. Yes, there's a lot of funny moments and obviously bright colors, but underneath there's these really deep ideas going on. And with Toy Story, starting out with Buzz Lightyear gets introduced to the mix, and so Woody gets rather upset about that because he feels like he's losing his favorite position. And so you have to realize that you're not going to be on top the entire time. And then for Buzz, it's also, I am a toy. It's realizing his own, he's a toy, but
his place in the world.
His place in the world and his own mortality, that he's not invincible. And especially when you get where he goes into a depressive slump when he realizes this, that causes him an existential crisis. And the fact that you get this in an animated movie from Pixar is utterly brilliant. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, so interesting bit of trivia. You ever heard of a movie called Howard the Duck?
I own Howard the Duck.
It's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that movie was produced by George Lucas, speaking of Star Wars. Howard the Duck is so bad that it bombed at the box office and nearly bankrupted Mr. Lucas. In order to escape bankruptcy, he sold off the special effects part of Lucasfilm to a man named Steve Jobs of Apple fame. And Steve Jobs took that technology, called up a guy named John Lasseter, and we get Pixar. So Howard the Duck is partially responsible for Toy Story, and I love that fact.
So at least something good came of it.
Yeah, I mean, and Toy Story, I mean, again, the first fully computer animated film ever made. I mean, it won a special Oscar eventually for that because at the time, the Best Animated Feature Oscar wasn't around. And then, okay, so we get into Toy Story 2, where you introduce more characters in this world, and so it's not just about, it's not Woody's existential crisis anymore. You get the introduction of the character Jessie, where she had been abandoned, and so she feels like, well, maybe I'm not as valuable. And then you get Woody at the potential where he could actually essentially be immortal if he gets and chooses to go to this children's museum or what have you, will be on display, and kids will see him and love him for on and on. And he has to decide, well, okay, do I want to do that, or am I more loyal to my friends and to Andy? And then Toy Story 3, I mean, after, I want to say it was like a 9-year gap or something like that.
It's like a decade.
Yeah, it was like 1999 to 2000, I think. We all thought, okay, there's no way Toy Story 3 is going to be any good. And then, oh my gosh, it was brilliant in how it handled things. Where, I mean, the villain that it brings in, it has similar issues to Jesse, but in a completely different way, especially because he's evil as opposed to being just this sympathetic figure. The climax at the end where they're in the dump and they're heading towards the incinerator, I mean, is literally, if kids watching that could probably be a changing moment in how frightening that could be. And just this idea that literally Pixar has chambered around with the word death on it, and they're about to fire the gun. And then the way that gets resolved is still one of my favorite little snippets in that movie. And then it finally, some people call the denouement a little hokey with how he meets the little girl and gives her toys and all that. But
spoiler alert.
Whatever. But I didn't find it hokey, really. I found it touching that it gives them hope after having gone through so much. So, and now we're getting Toy Story 4, which in some ways I actually wish they hadn't done that, but then I said the same thing about Toy Story 3, so here's hoping. I love Toy Story. Not one of them is bad. Again, to go from, in 1995, putting out the first animated film completely done on the computer, to here we are, and Toy Story 3 becomes the first billion-dollar animated movie. I don't know what else I can say. Toy Story is awesome, and it's my favorite trilogy of all time.
I really need to see it recently. I saw the first one last year, but I didn't follow up with the second and third. The second one I haven't seen since when it came out.
Yeah.
And I've never seen the third one.
Oh, you must complete this in the same way that I have to complete the Three Colors trilogy.
I know. Which brings me to my number one, which a lot of people are going to be familiar with, the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Ah, yes.
Now, not The Hobbit. I want to be very, 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 very clear on that, because The Hobbit is, let's just say, not good. But the Lord of the Rings trilogy is it might be my best as well.
The simple fact that it exists is something.
Amazing.
Because, I mean, the fact that they gave Peter Jackson license to make these gigantic, sprawling, 3-hour epics, and he turns them into something astonishing.
They really have everything for me. I mean, they're not pure action movies. They've got lots of drama, too. They're incredibly moving. It's got a rich story, a layered story. And, you know, when you do get to the action, it's really, really good action.
Yes.
In addition to, I mean, the first one came out in 2001. Those special effects hold up now better than the Hobbit special effects do. That came out last year.
Yes.
It's an astonishing thing that they're made, that they're this good, and that, I mean, I've seen them like 6 times each, at least.
Yeah.
And that's the extended versions. And
Yeah.
those are 3+ hours each. I think Return of the King almost hits 4.
Yeah.
And that they're that compelling after seeing it that many times is just, it's stunning to me.
I'm absolutely right on board with you. I mean, I remember those coming out, and I had just started high school, and then to see that, and I was like, my mind is blown with the fact that this is that this is on screen, especially because he makes that story interesting. Because, like, honestly, when I read the books, I'm bored reading these books. Because
I only made it like halfway through the second one.
Yeah, there's so much stuff, and yet Jackson was able to pare out a lot of stuff that didn't work. I still have some issues with Two Towers. That's in my opinion the weakest.
It's the weakest of the three. Yeah.
So, but the simple fact that these exist, and then as you said, they're poignant. You have great character moment. I mean, and this is the real thing with the contrast for me with The Hobbit is he gets a lot of character moments, and it's really about the characters, and then the action sequences reinforce that, and they're good action sequences. Where in The Hobbit, it's mostly about the action sequences, and the characters get left behind, more or less. And so, yeah, The Lord of the Rings is definitely a stunning achievement, and they're very great trilogy.
So that brings us. I mean, we've got our top 3
Yep.
now. Now we get to have, I think, almost more fun ripping into the trilogies that we hate.
Yes.
I'll let you go first. So what's number 3 on your list?
Okay, so my number 1 favorite was an animated movie, or an animated trilogy. My number 3 least favorite is also an animated trilogy, Cinderella trilogy. Now, I would imagine that most people have not seen Cinderella 2 and 3, or maybe not even aware that there's a Cinderella 2 or 3. Unfortunately, there is. The first Cinderella movie, I'm mixed on it. It's well animated, especially for 1950, and the villain Maleficent is still probably the best villain in Disney history ever. But other than that, I mean, the characters are so boring for the most part. The prince has maybe 2 lines in the entire movie. The romance is stupid. The stepsisters are annoying. But other than that, I mean, it's just an okay film. Unfortunately, then we get Cinderella 2, Dreams Come True.
Now, did the sequels get to theaters, or were they direct to video?
To my knowledge, they were direct to video.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I also grew up right in this period, and so I've seen a lot of the straight to DVD sequels from Disney, and
probably straight to VHS at that point.
Yes, yeah. Well, some of them were VHS, and then some of them were eventually DVD. But yeah, there's a lot of those that are just awful. But Cinderella 2 and 3 definitely take the cake. Cinderella 2, Dreams Come True, which that name is stupid right off the bat, but it's actually a trilogy of vignettes. It's not even a coherent story in and of itself.
Wonderful.
So the first story you get where Cinderella is this happy princess, but she doesn't want to lose the common touch because she had obviously grown up as a scullery maid, and so she's trying to change things, but she's doing it just through sheer force of happy personality, and I'm like, oh, I want to destroy you. And then the second story is one of her mouse companions, Jock, wants to be human, and so he gets turned human, and
why?
Hijinks ensue. Yeah,
okay.
Just why? And then the third story in this trilogy, or of vignettes, is one of the stepsisters, the evil stepsisters, you know, the ones who like actually tortured a woman. She wants to have a romance, but the person she wants to have a romance with is a commoner. And so her mother is not approving because, oh, you're an aristocrat, you can't marry with a commoner, that's just wrong. And so Cinderella literally goes and helps her stepsister stand up to the evil stepmother and find romance with a commoner.
Wow.
What?
That sounds like compelling cinema.
It's not compelling, and it's some of the most cynically stupid writing I have seen in an animated film outside of something like Cars 2. Where it's like, I'm sorry, what? And then we get to Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time. Now, that title is unfortunately indicative of what this movie does. The evil stepmother gets a hold of the fairy godmother's wand and retcons Cinderella 1 out of existence so that one of the evil stepdaughters is now the prince's wife. Or basically the love interest. And so we then try to it's basically Cinderella working against the fairy or the evil stepmother, trying to fix things, and they introduce. The ironic thing is, so one of my problems with the first Cinderella was that it had bland characters. In Cinderella 3, they try to make up for that by actually introducing personality traits to these characters. Unfortunately, it's just at this point, I don't care. And the simple fact that we're now trying to retcon Cinderella 1 out of existence, I mean, put it this way, in terms of Cinderella retcons, Maleficent kind of did it better. and that movie still had a lot of problems with it too. But yeah, Cinderella 3. But I mean, Cinderella 2 is still the most abominable of these three. But they didn't need to exist as sequels, and they're actually one of the few trilogies that Disney has ever actually done. Because
usually the second one's bad enough.
Yeah, I mean, we could go into like Little Mermaid 2 or Lady and the Tramp 2 or Fox and the Hound 2, but yeah, the only other trilogies that Disney ever really did that I can think of were the Lion King movies, which those could have made my list too, because the Lion King 2 is dumb and the Lion King 1.5 is even worse. And then the other one that nearly made my list was the Beauty and the Beast trilogy, which again, most people don't know there's a trilogy to that. That made it avoided my list solely because I love the first Beauty and the Beast so much that I just couldn't do it. But the second and third ones, and they're not even actual real sequels in a way. They're actually, I think the term is midquel, where they actually take place technically during Beauty and the Beast. So Magical Christmas actually takes place afterward because they're all human by then. But or Enchanted Christmas, not Magical Christmas. Magical World takes place during Beauty and the Beast, and it's basically a trilogy of vignettes, much like Cinderella 2, but it's all about how the Beast is a jerk, and Belle tries to change him through the power of just being there, and rinse, repeat, and what have you. But again, that managed to avoid my list just because I love the first one so much. But so Cinderella trilogy, first one is meh, second one is awful, third one is pretty bad too. So that's number 3 for me. What's number 3 for you?
Taking things in a completely different direction, the Expendables trilogy.
Ah, yes.
They're kind of like Cinderella in the fact that lots of dudes get blown up.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there was all these commoners that get. Oh wait, no, that didn't happen.
That didn't happen. That might have made the sequels better, the Cinderella sequels.
That would have made those movies as a whole much better if you had a lot of intent. I mean, at least with Cinderella, okay, you get Maleficent as a dragon, and so yeah, that was pretty awesome. But other than that, so yes, please go on. Tell us about the lovely old dudes trying to be action heroes again.
So, I mean, the first movie isn't. I don't think it's terrible. It has a good action scene at the beginning and a good one at the end. Most of it is boring.
Yep.
It's got actors who shouldn't be acting anymore.
Mr. Lundgren.
I mean, about the only one there that's still culturally relevant is Jason Statham.
And that's only because he's like 10 years younger than, or at least 10 years younger than Stallone.
At least 10 years younger.
Yeah.
And I mean, Mickey Rourke has one good scene, and he has one good acting scene, and then he got kicked out of the sequels because he was too good. So mostly it's just these old dudes hanging out, sometimes doing action. They can't decide if they want PG-13 or R, so it's kind of an in-between violence. And it's supposed to be a throwback to the 80s action movies, but we kind of forget that the 80s action movies sucked.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason why we like 80s action movies is because they're ironically dumb.
But this one wasn't. It's just, it's boring.
It's boring.
And it's super, super serious.
Of course.
And the dialogue just makes me want to cry. They barely have plots.
Are you saying Sylvester Stallone can't write scripts that well, generally?
Well, not anymore.
Yeah, I mean, where's the first Rocky when you need it?
I know. They just... action movies shouldn't be putting you to sleep.
No, they should
not.
The
Expendables series could put me to sleep.
I could certainly see that.
What is number 2 on your list?
Well, we just got done talking about it. It's the Taken trilogy. Now, some people will probably give me a little flack for hating the first one, but even when I first saw the first one, I did not like it. I found the story, I mean, again, yeah, the novelty of Liam Neeson at that time was kind of interesting, but I found the story to be so dumb that I couldn't get on board with it. Some of the action was okay, but I just could not get on board with Taken 1. And then Taken 2 starts out with a decent premise where, again, I mentioned before, what if the family members of all the evil people he killed in the first one decided to get together and take him out?
And then it blows it.
Yeah, and then it completely wastes it, and, I mean, Mr. Megaton making his entrance into the series. The man is a hack, and Taken 2 is the first indication of that, and then we've already spent several minutes lambasting Taken 3. Taken 3...
It's somehow worse. I still don't get how they made it worse.
I don't either. I didn't think you could get worse than Taken 2, but Taken 3 is just so utterly awful in every way. I personally couldn't really come up with anything positive to say other than, okay, yeah, it doesn't look like it was put together by a high school drama team. Okay, sure. But
sometimes it does.
Well, not completely. Like, for reference, that's what I think of The Legend of Hercules, is that was put together by a high school drama team. And whereas this, okay, it looks like somewhat the professionals made it. It's still terrible, but it at least looks something like an actual film. So
it looks kind of like it had a $40 million budget.
Yeah.
Half of which went to Liam Neeson.
Yes. And then, can it not be Taken 4? So, but I've spent enough time lambasting Taken 3. So, the Taken trilogy is my number 2 least favorite trilogy of all time. What is your number 2?
One that, when I was younger, the trailer scared me. It's the Grudge trilogy.
Ooh, interesting.
Now, I had completely forgotten that they made sequels to that.
I actually didn't know that they had made sequels to this. I knew that there was... I remember the original Grudge just because of that. That was the one with the creepy black-haired girl who, like, sticks out of walls or something like that, I think.
If I remember right, it's actually a boy. It's like a 10-year-old boy or something.
Really?
Wow. Yeah.
Huh.
But the trailer for the first one scared me for quite a while, so I was like, okay, I won't watch it. And then I finally got around to it, and it was nothing. Yeah. It was so boring. And then they made a sequel, and the sequel was worse. And then they made another sequel.
I didn't even know they made sequels to this, so this is news to me. But I suppose it's not surprising that the sequels are awful.
The first sequel, if I remember right, actually has the same main character, and then they like write her out, and then it's another character. And then the third one is basically completely unrelated, takes place in like a different building, and I have no idea why they made it.
That's just often the case with a lot of these dumb sequels. It's like, why does this exist?
But none of them were any scary. They were all so boring, and the acting is atrocious. Oh, it's bad. And even, like, little kids in movies can be creepy. This little kid in the movie wasn't creepy.
So disappointing. But, as you say,
and
I think horror sequels are probably some of the worst ones generally, because very rarely do they improve. I mean, I think the only ones that compare in terms of how bad sequels can be is with comedy sequels, because very rarely are comedy sequels any good. And
the first one, it's a remake of the Japanese movie, and that's just a trend that hasn't worked for the most part. Yeah,
very rarely do you get a translation like that actually works. I mean, we could call the Hunger Games a translation of Battle Royale, kind of.
No, we can't.
But Battle Royale's still better.
Yeah.
And we won't even get into the Korean thing with adapting Old Boy. That would be a tragedy.
That was disappointing.
Yeah.
So what was your least favorite trilogy?
Well, I mentioned the comedy sequels are oftentimes much, much worse. So my number 1 least favorite trilogy is the Hangover trilogy.
Oh, hey, that's mine too.
Wow. Oh,
what a coincidence.
Awesome. So, I semi-like the first one. I mean, and mostly I think it was where I was in my life at the time, that it had some funny moments, but no, it's not that good of a movie. It's one of those ones where it's like, okay, it's a guilty pleasure that I could watch maybe once every 10 years, but any love I have for the first one is immediately destroyed by the second film being so obnoxious, and it's literally a repeat of the first movie, just in Thailand, which of course then affords them opportunities to make lovely cultural stereotypes and horrific references about people from Thailand, and Oh, so and then the third one, yeah, the third one breaks the formula and how it works, but I'm just done after the second one. So the third one it felt like I was dying a little inside watching it. I hated all these characters, and particularly Zach Galifianakis, because
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the man is amazing. I mean, he's supposed to be this lovable, oafish goober who we're supposed to think is funny and sweet. He's just misunderstood. I'm like, no, the dude is a sociopath who probably should be locked up. And I hate the second and third one, and they, like I said, any love I have for the first one is demolished to dust and then ground under somebody's jackboot because it's so terrible.
See, I hate the first one as well. I think it's the stupider version of Dude, Where's My Car? And I don't know how that's possible.
Yeah,
but somehow it is. I mean, I don't want to spoil it too much, but I'm going to spoil it a little bit. Essentially, the plot is resolved randomly. I mean, they go on this journey. I mean, the plot is that their friend is missing. They have to find him so they can get him to his wedding. So they go on this quest, and it's supposed to be learning and stuff. But no, they just go, oh, I remember where he is. And then that's it.
Yep.
That's the first movie.
Yep.
Second movie is the same thing.
Yep.
But in Thailand.
Yep.
Then the third movie is just... Okay, at least the first two movies got at least one laugh out of me when Mike Tyson showed up. The Mike Tyson cameo in the second movie was probably the highlight of the series.
Yep.
He's not even in the third one, so it got no laughs. Todd Phillips is probably my least favorite director currently working, because he hasn't made a good movie.
Yeah.
They're all stupid comedies.
He's definitely up there among my least favorites. I mean, especially, didn't he do, what was it? Was it Project X or 21 and Over?
I have no idea. Project X, maybe.
I think it was Project X, but I mean, even still, yeah, he doesn't really have a lot of good stuff under his belt, and
doesn't have any good stuff under his belt.
Yeah, and The Hangover is.
He produced Project X.
Okay, that's what it was. But yeah, I'm right there with you. The Hangover trilogy is nauseating, and so help me if they make another one, I'm going to protest.
I don't think I'll see it. I think I'll refuse, just on principle.
I would probably consider doing that too, just because I'm done with this trilogy.
Well, with that, we've come to the end of the second episode of Matt and Matt at the Movies. You can follow Gerald on the Twitter at FilmFlashNC and on his website at filmflashnc.blogspot.com. I'm on the Twitter as well at MartyrTweet and on the web at boxofficeboredom.com. Comments, criticism, praise, and suggestions are all welcome, as long as you are, of course, civil about it. On tap for next week, we've got Black Hat, Paddington, The Wedding Ringer in wide release, as well as the nationwide expansion of American Sniper. We'll also be revealing and discussing our respective top 20 films of 2014. Until next time, this is Matt and Matt at the Movies, signing off.
Have a good one. See you next week.